everyone, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Sandy.
And this is the Italian American Stories podcast. Well, Mom and I are back together today.
Yeah, missed a week there.
We did, yeah. Schedules just didn't work out, but I did the episode on my own and I couldn't believe that it was only like 8 minutes. But usually if you and I do a script that's kind of shorter, it extends out just because we chit chat. But
oh, that's true. Yeah.
At the end of this one, I was like, 8 minutes, huh? All right. Well, it is what it is.
It was cute.
It was good. Yeah. And a nice, just quick little episode for Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
But today's story, I'm pretty excited about. I've been researching this one for a while. This story is about Maria Barbella, and it is going to be a doozy. Actually, this episode, or this story, will probably be, I think, just 2 episodes, because it's a pretty big one. Maybe 3, but I think we can get it done in 2. So
I saw your pile of research. This is about 7 inches tall.
It's insane.
8 inches.
Oh my gosh, this woman lived quite the life. And so we're going to talk about it today.
Okay.
Maria Barbella was the first woman in America to be sentenced to die in the electric chair after she killed the man that she thought she would marry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This will be interesting.
It'll be interesting.
Right off the bat.
Yeah. So she wasn't the first woman sentenced to die in America, but she was the first woman sentenced to die by electric chair in America. Okay. So... and like always, we'll start with the family history. So Maria was born to Michael Barbella and Filomena Buonsanto on October 24th, 1868 in Matera, which is in the Basilicata region of Italy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Our region.
That's our region. And Maria, she was one of 5 children. And in 1892, the family came to America and settled in Manhattan, New York, in the Little Italy area. So Maria, she was working as a seamstress in a local clothing factory. And she would actually end up working 60 hours a week to help support her family.
Wow.
Yeah. And so Mom and Dad were working as well. And she had siblings, but I'm not sure of their ages. I think she had a little sister who was married. So she, obviously lived with her family, but that's a lot of hours.
That's, wow.
1890s. In a factory. Oh my gosh.
Good grief. No air conditioning, no nothing.
Nothing. In the middle of summer and humidity and all that. Ugh. Mm-hmm. Maria, she also suffered from epilepsy, which obviously made life a little harder, especially during that time. We didn't have medications. People did not understand what epilepsy was. In fact, most people looked at it as a mental disorder.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
They're not choosing to have a seizure. It's not a mental thing, but that's just what it was at that time. So now in the few short years that they had been in New York, a man named Domenico Cataldo had begun pursuing Maria, and he promised her love and marriage. And now Domenico, he was a few years older than Maria, and, he kind of preyed on her innocence and vulnerability being in the country, because he actually came from the same region as them. So they had a little bit in common. Their backgrounds were similar, but he had been in America longer. So he
and he's older.
And he's older. So he could kind of take a little bit of advantage of her. So Domenico, he was a boot black, which is a person who shines boots. Had to look that one up.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
I hadn't either. And whenever Maria would walk past the shop that he worked at, he would always greet her and try to talk to her. But at first, Maria was really shy and she would try to avoid him until one day she decided to say hello to him. Now, Domenico, he was not described as a handsome man. Apparently, he had smallpox scars and I saw this in the paper, was on the heavier side. I think he kind of started winning Maria over, and the two started talking. And like I said earlier, they realized they were both from the Basilicata region. And with this conversation, their relationship started, if you can even call it a relationship. So, and we'll get into that. So he would tell her that he had saved $923, which is about $35,000 today.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. And he would say things like, if I could find the right girl, I would marry her. And so, of course, he's telling this to Maria, and she's thinking, oh, I could be that girl.
Yeah. No more 60 hours a week.
No more 60 hours a week. Exactly. And so he would tell her that he had a dream to open up a barbershop one day. And Maria, she truly started seeing a future with him, which you can't blame her. I mean, he's telling her, like, I have this dream and I have this dream. And he's talking to her about it.
Right.
he would stop by the clothing factory that Maria worked at, basically to walk her home, but he would never walk her all the way to her door. He would walk her like to the home and then turn around and leave because he didn't want to meet her parents. So there's another red flag.
Right.
And so her parents, they were excited to hear that Maria maybe had met her possible future husband. And they were really thrilled that he was from the same region in Italy, but they weren't sure why he was not coming to the door. And so her dad started getting a little suspicious here. Now, as the relationship, like I said, if you want to even call it that, as it progressed, he would physically and sexually abuse Maria.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so he's not a great guy. And he would emotionally beat her down, just make her feel worthless and all of this kind of stuff. But then after that, he would always promise that he would marry her. So he's playing some major head games here. I did see in a couple of articles where Domenico, he finally did meet her parents and her father immediately hated him. So eventually, though, she did tell her parents about his advances towards her, and they told her at that point, we don't want you seeing him unless he proposed marriage. Keep in mind, this is the 1800s, so right. It's a different time. So Maria, she decided that she would start taking a different route to and from work to avoid walking by Domenico's place of work. But one day when she left work, he was outside of the factory waiting for her. And when he approached her, he immediately told her that he would marry her. And so, of course, she was thrilled and immediately went home to tell her parents. So a few days later, the couple, they went to a local bar/boarding room to celebrate the engagement. And what I'm picturing is, in the Western movies, they have like the saloon on the bottom floor and then upstairs are rooms. That's kind of what I'm picturing here. That's why I said like local bar/boarding room. So Maria, she didn't drink alcohol. So Domenico, he bought her a soda. But after a few sips, Maria started feeling a little weird and a little dizzy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it gets really, really bad here.
Even way back then.
Yeah. So Domenico told her, well, maybe you need to go lay down for a while. And he led her to one of their bedrooms upstairs. So a few hours later, Maria woke up in a bed with Domenico lying next to her, and she obviously knew what he had done. And she was, of course, upset about this, but she was also so ashamed because at this time, a woman's reputation is everything. Right. And she told Domenico that he had ruined her reputation, and because of this, he had to marry her. But I guess he just sat there and didn't say anything to her in return. However, Maria, she continued to see Domenico, and whenever they would see each other, they would just fight over getting married. So on April 20th, Domenico, he finally flat out told Maria that he didn't want to get married. And according to Maria, he told her, quote, I'll find you a young man willing to marry you. I'll tell him that you're a widow. I'll buy you a black dress. You'll marry him because I want you to. Then I'll come visit you while he's at work.
Wow.
Who does this man think he is? I put in my script notes, WTF. Yes. Like, oh my gosh, the head games that this man is playing with her. So obviously Maria was devastated and she left the apartment and went back home. And she told her mother about everything that had happened.
Oh, thank goodness.
So she told her mom about the physical, the sexual advances, the assault. After this, though, the rumors, they really started swirling around in Little Italy. And so people were talking about how Maria and Domenico had participated in an inappropriate relationship. And this is, of course, making it even harder for Maria and her family.
Right.
However, there were other rumors that were starting to spread around Little Italy about Domenico planning to return to Italy where his wife and children still were.
Oh, wow.
So even if he wanted to marry Maria, he was already married.
Well, doesn't surprise me. No,
me either. It's like, what a dirtbag. So Maria, of course, she heard about this, and this just added to her trauma and how upset she was. And she decided at this point to confront Domenico. And this is where the story gets a little crazy, so buckle in. So on April 26, 1895, she and her mother, they went looking for Domenico, and of course, where did they find him? In the bar. And this bar was called Mancuso's Saloon, and her mother was furious, and she marched right into the bar and approached Domenico. And she demanded that he honor Maria. She yelled at him saying, how can you not follow your own people's customs? And Domenico looked at her and said, I'll consider marrying her for $200, which is about $7,500 today. And her mother was furious and just stormed out of the bar. So he's like, okay, you pay me and I'll consider marrying her. Like, so frustrating. So Mom storms out of the bar and she's super frustrated. Maria, however, decided to stay at the bar and confront him about the rumors. And this is what he told Maria. Quote, "Only a pig would marry you." And with that, those were the last words that Domenico would ever speak, because Maria pulled a razor blade from her sleeve and sliced Domenico's throat.
Wow.
And so Maria freaked out and just took off out of the bar. And Domenico, he stood up holding his throat and staggered out into the streets. And he was trying to run after Maria, but he collapsed on the street where he died within minutes. When I read that, I could just picture that scene in my mind, because she had their dresses were long sleeve and she had the razor there. And when he said that, that was it for her. And she just pulled it out and sliced his throat. So now accounts of this incident do vary. It's been said that she grabbed his head and tilted his head back and deliberately cut his throat. Ooh, I know. Mom just got chills. Other accounts say that she just cut his throat. Just whipped out the razor blade and cut his throat. Some accounts say that it was in self-defense because he lunged at her. Some accounts say that she slit his throat so quickly that she didn't even have time to think about what she was doing. So on April 26th and 27th, there are so many news reports that come out from all the papers, and they all have different stories. So wow, take it with a grain of salt. And we'll get into Maria's testimony and, what she has to say about this later. That will kind of clear up some of that. But that just tells you how much the newspapers vary on this incident.
Yeah, that's amazing, because there had to be witnesses.
Yeah, she's in a bar. Exactly. Now, Maria, she obviously left the saloon and threw the razor blade into the street. She then walked back to her home, changed her clothes, and washed her hands. And some accounts say that she put the bloody clothes behind a stool in her room, like a little sitting stool. But she was quickly arrested because, like you and I were just saying, there were numerous witnesses sitting in the bar. And when she was arrested, she told the police, keep in mind, she did not speak very good English, so this is an actual quote, "Me take his blood, so he no take mine. Say me pig Mary." And so she was actually booked under the wrong name. So her name is Maria Barbella, but the police wrote down Marie Barberi. So if you ever look into this story, you'll see that name pop up as well, because a lot of the court documents and police documents have that as her name. And she was held at the New York Halls of Justice in the House of Detention, otherwise known as the Tombs at that time. That's a little dark.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And her parents, of course, they were destroyed over the arrest of Maria. Her father swore that he would do everything he could to free his daughter. And Maria's younger sister told the New York Times, quote, "My sister did perfectly right in killing him." Might have not helped her defense later on, that quote, but I get it. So Maria, she was held in jail for 2.5 months before her trial started. And she was appointed 2 very inexperienced attorneys. They were honestly not really invested in her case. They actually only met with her once while preparing for her case. And I think they just had the mentality of, she's just a poor immigrant and she killed him. We're just going to do our job and move on. When she was arrested, she was accused of killing him for his money and for ruining her reputation. That's what the police were saying, this is her motive. So while the police were preparing for her trial, they actually tested her criminality, so how much of a criminal she is, by measuring her skull and facial features.
I've never heard of that.
Welcome to 1895.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what came out of this, but that's just what was reported in the papers. That's how they were testing her criminality. So
how weird.
There's that. And so the press, they were not very friendly towards her either. The Brooklyn Eagle said, quote, "This is the United States and not Italy. And Italians who come here must learn that the stiletto and the razor as instruments of justice are under ban." And, they would go on to talk about Italians and, because they're new to the country and how they don't understand our ways. But the papers would also go on to describe Maria's looks. And one paper described her as, quote, "short, dumpy, and flat-faced."
Good grief.
It's what does that have to do with anything? It doesn't have anything to do with it.
Same as measuring her skull and her facial features.
Exactly. They also talked about how she understood no English or the ways of America, and they would relate her not understanding English with her intelligence level. which is like, that's not, just because she can't speak English doesn't mean she's not intelligent.
Yeah.
So Maria's trial, it began on July 11th, and Maria showed up wearing a dress that she actually made for herself while she was in prison. She was also wearing a hat that was trimmed with orange flowers and feathers. The paper reported her as being really tired and that her eyes were bloodshot because she was up crying all night. So the jury, it was all men because women weren't allowed on juries at this time. And there were also no Italians selected as jurors. And the Italian colony in New York was really upset about this and felt that Maria would not be treated fairly because there was really none of her peers representing her. It was reported in the Evening World newspaper out of New York that Maria's attorneys, they were actually looking for men to serve on the jury who were from the southern states because they believed that they would be more chivalrous and not want to condemn Maria to death. So that was one of their criteria, like, hey, you got roots in the South? Perfect, you're on.
Well,
I mean, it's a strategy for sure. And so like we were just talking, Maria, she spoke little English and didn't really understand what was happening during the trial. And she actually thought that all the attorneys, including her own, were prosecuting attorneys, so that she thought that they were against her.
Oh, so she felt she didn't have anybody.
She didn't have anybody. And maybe that's because they only met with her once.
Right.
So now Maria, during her testimony, she freely admitted everything. She talked about how she slit his throat and how she was so upset over how he treated her. And her testimony, it was translated by a translator who was said to have not done a very good job. He was like, they kind of described him as sometimes not paying attention. And then when they would ask him, you could tell he was almost just coming up with stuff. So he was not a great interpreter. When Maria did testify about cutting Demencio's throat, the way that I took it was that she just pulled the razor out and sliced his throat, not tilted his head back. That's the way that I took it. Whether the translator said it correctly or not, I don't know. So the prosecuting attorneys said that the murder was premeditated because she hid the razor blade in her dress sleeve. But I read an article that was published in like 1996 where it talked about a lot of women at that time, especially Italian women, would hide knives or razor blades in their sleeves just as a form of protection because they were scared.
Right.
So it kind of sounds like that was sort of a norm. She probably got up every morning and hid like a little knife or a razor blade in her arm, like numerous Italian women did at that time. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But
yeah, well, the men carried a knife, so
yeah, exactly.
Put a knife in their pocket.
Yeah, and they're in a new country. They probably made them feel safe. So
especially not speaking English.
Exactly. You don't really know what's going on. Police officer John O'Rourke, he interviewed her, and this is what he said during his testimony at her trial. He said, quote, "She admitted having entered the bar while Domenico Cataldo was playing cards. Then after having grasped the man by the hair and pulled his head back, she had cut his throat. Then she had run away. Domenico ran after her, but almost immediately he had fallen to the ground dead. The woman confessed that she had been relieved when she saw him fall because she was afraid of him." So again, this is contradicting testimony. Maria's testimony made it sound like she just pulled the knife out and slit his throat. This officer made it sound like she leaned his head back and then slit his throat. So I don't know, take it with a grain of salt, I guess.
Yeah.
Now, the judge, he would not allow testimony about Domenico and his character into the courtroom. So nobody could come in and testify like, Domenico was abusive, Domenico said bad things to her. All of that was not allowed into the courtroom.
Yeah, it's really sounding one-sided here.
It is, exactly.
They just want it over.
Now, Maria's mother, she ended up taking the stand, and she was described as, quote, "a little dried up, withered woman. Her head was bare, and hoops of gold glittered in her ears. These, and her heavy, thick black hair and swarthy skin, as well as the blanket-like shawl around her shoulders, gave her the appearance of an Indian." It's just so random. Again, welcome to 1895.
Right.
So she testified that she would constantly go and talk to Cataldo about marrying her daughter. And she also said that she did not see her daughter kill Cataldo because if you remember, she spoke to
left.
him. Yeah. Yep. She spoke to him first and then she left. So one paper reported that the jury was said to really show no sympathy towards Maria. And the judge even told the jurors, quote, "Your verdict must be an example of justice. A jury must not concern itself with mercy. The law does not distinguish between the sexes, and The fragility of the female sex is sometimes involved to excuse savage crimes. We cannot publicly proclaim a woman not guilty of killing a man solely because this man has proposed marriage and then changed his mind. And so the newspapers were kind of split. They were either supportive or against Maria during the trial. One paper described Maria as, quote, "Her jaws are very heavy, the forehead is low, and the ears stand out prominently. The right side of the face is much larger than the left. Indeed, the face looks as if it had been violently twisted toward the right. She often shed tears very quietly, however, and without sobs. Her body is bent and seems ill-nourished. Her thick eyelids are red and swollen as if from much weeping." But other newspapers talked about how she didn't really truly understand what was going on because of the language barrier and were just more supportive. So the papers were kind of torn. It probably depended on what paper you picked up that day to read. So during the trial, Maria's family, they actually fell on pretty hard times. It took a financial toll on them. Her father was not working as much since the trial had started, and he was spending his money on, quote, "delicacies for Maria while she was in prison." Maria was working 60 hours a week to help support the family, and that income's gone. Yeah, so... And one of Maria's attorneys, he actually gave the family $5, which is $200 today, to help them out. On June 15th, Maria's trial, it did end, and the jury took only 45 minutes to return the guilty verdict. And the jury foreman, he did come out and say that they convicted her on just facts. So after her verdict, Maria started gaining sympathy from the public. The thought of a woman being sentenced to death was really hard for the public to wrap their mind around. I mean, keep in mind, this is 1890, and I think before her, there was only 2 women who had ever been convicted to death in America before that. So this is a very new thing here. So like I said, she was really starting to gain sympathy from the public. So in fact, she even had a countess from Italy reach out to her. And this lady, her name was Cora Slocum, and she was actually an American woman, but she married an Italian count named Count di Talmo di Brazza. Cora, she was actually Scottish. Somehow they met and she married this count, and they were actually living in Italy, but Cora had been following the case the whole time in the newspapers. And when Maria was convicted, she knew she had to help. So she gets on a ship and comes to America to help out Maria. She was very, very invested in this. So the Countess, she got there and was able to visit Maria in prison on July 17th, 1895. And the paper said that the Countess put her arm around Maria and spoke to Maria and tried to tell her, like, "I'm going to work on your behalf to save your life." And Maria's mother was there. And it was said that during this conversation, all the women in the room were weeping. Yeah. That's pretty sweet. So Maria would go on to tell the Countess her life story all the way up to the incident with Domenico. And after her visit, the Countess told the Evening World, quote, "I am here to do what I can for this poor girl, and I can do much. I give you my word of honor that within 1 week I can have such a petition for mercy presented to Governor Morton as will astonish him. I will have on the petition the names of every one of the so-called 400. I will have on it bankers, merchants, and lawyers, and the very biggest men and the foremost women of this city and state. I have seen such cases among my people, and I know that the girl thought she only did right to defend her honor as she did." Wow. So she was...
This lady's going after.
She was all in for Maria. So the Countess, after this, she would receive letters of thanks for supporting Maria, but she also started receiving death threats. So that just kind of tells you the divide on this case. Some people were like, yep, let's get Maria out of prison. Other people were like, nope, she's where she should be. So kind of crazy. But the next day on July 18th, Maria's lawyers asked for a new trial, stating that the first trial was unjust and unfair since some of the testimony was omitted or not even allowed. And also during this court hearing, this was also her sentencing. So this was when everybody found out that she was sentenced to death by the electric chair, and she was sentenced to die on August 19th, 1895. So 30 days from now. So they really had to get that appeal in as quick as possible to save her life, basically. So like we said earlier, she was the second woman sentenced to death, but the first to be sentenced to die by the electric chair. And she was actually also the first woman to be on death row at Sing Sing prison in New York. So a lot of firsts here. Yeah. And she was actually the first woman in 18 years to be held at Sing Sing.
Is that prison still there? I think
it is. Yeah. So Maria's father and brother and the Countess were all present in the courtroom for the sentencing. And when they heard, that she would be sentenced to death, they all quietly wept. But the court would not let Maria's mother and her sister into the courtroom out of fear that they would make too much of a scene. So she was transferred to Sing Sing prison on July 19th, and the Countess had a dozen red roses delivered to the prison for Maria when she got there.
Oh,
I know. So Maria, she was the only woman at the prison at that time, and she was technically supposed to go to the death house at Sing Sing, but it was all men. And so the warden didn't really feel comfortable with that. So he actually gave her a room in the hospital section of the prison because, again, the death house had all men there.
right.
And they were also working on getting female guards to keep an eye on Maria. So,
Well, that's good.
and actually, the warden's daughter volunteered to be one of the first people to guard Maria, I guess you could say, until they could officially get somebody in there. But once she got to Sing Sing, at this point, she knew that she was sentenced to die by the electrical chair, and this really frightened her. And because of this, she refused to sit in any chair. She thought that they were all electrical and they were going to kill her.
Yeah.
So one of the prison matrons would actually have to sit in the chair first to prove to Maria that she was okay. And then Maria would sit in the chair. Poor thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's got to be so terrifying. She also was scared that everyone was out to kill her. So when they tried to get her to stand against a wall so they could measure her height, she refused, thinking that they were going to kill her. But eventually, again, the matron stepped in and stood there, and then she would stand. And so it was reported in the New York Times the very next day after Maria arrived at Sing Sing that the governor of New York, Governor Morton, was being flooded with letters asking mercy on Maria's behalf. Again, however, some of these letters were against Maria, but the bulk of them were asking the governor to have mercy on her. And a lot of these letters are actually published in the papers, but there were other people who were writing the governor as well. So, the Countess is writing to the governor on behalf of Maria. A colonel in the army, Colonel Robert G. Ingersoll, wrote to the governor. Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote a letter to the governor asking for him to pardon Maria. So Maria had some pretty big prominent people in the public on her side.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And so Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she was a leading figure at this time in the women's rights movement in the U.S. And she worked closely with Susan B. Anthony and played a key role in the suffrage movement. And she was also advocating for women's property rights, education, and legal equality. So having Elizabeth Cady Stanton in your corner at that time was kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
And so part of Elizabeth Stanton's letter said, quote, "No woman has ever had a fair trial from every point of view, nor will she have until she is tried by a jury of her peers." She's saying like until women are allowed on a jury,
Right.
they can't truly be represented.
Yeah, it's totally one-sided.
And at this point, even some of the jurors were speaking out and saying that they actually supported pardoning Maria. Another thing that I thought was really cool, a lot of small Italian clubs across the country began raising money for Maria. And these Italian clubs were also writing letters to the governor asking for the governor to pardon her. So, for example, some of these clubs were the George Washington Italian Society in Boston, the Italo-Americans in Galveston, Texas, the Italo-American Society of New York, an Italian colony in Trenton, New Jersey, a church in Arkansas, and and a women's group in Aspen, Colorado. And that's just a few of them, but kind of gives you an idea of the stretch, like
Right.
New York to Arkansas,
knows about
Colorado.
this.
Yeah, and they were raising money to support her. So the courts, they did grant Maria a stay so that her attorneys could complete an appeal. So as of July 21st, her death sentence was basically paused so that they could complete the appeal. So obviously, Maria, she was not fond of being in prison, but after a while, Maria became kind of a celebrity in the prison. She was kind of loved, like they kind of adored her. She was given a larger cell, and she would even say later that it was larger than her apartment room.
Wow.
And so
she wasn't in the hospital room anymore.
Well, I think they kept her in the hospital room, but just gave her a larger area because everybody else in the prison was men and they didn't want to keep her in there. So even the warden's wife liked Maria, and she made it her mission to teach her English. So she would go every day and teach her how to read and write and speak English. So she would also teach her the social norms of America. So that way she didn't feel so isolated, I guess you could say.
Right. And apparently had a very positive attitude of this outcome of the new trial.
Exactly. Yeah. To go through all of that.
Right.
And this part made me laugh. So the warden's wife, she liked Maria so much that she made sure that Maria's meals were prepared by the warden's personal chef.
Wow.
Yeah, so Maria got her own food. She had her own, like,
room.
basically her own floor,
her own apartment,
tutor, everything. She was also given a yellow canary bird to keep in her prison cell with her. Her brother gave it to her, and the warden was like, sure, you can have a bird. Like, why not? But regardless of all of this, she was said to be a model prisoner. So of course you're going to be. Like, right. You've got everything you need. But even outside of the prison, Maria was kind of becoming a celebrity within the public. So there was a company that would make wax figurines of Maria and sell them at Coney Island. How crazy. Wow. I could not find anything like who the company was or what they looked like, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
She is quite the celebrity.
She is. There was also a play going on of the murder, and it was called The Life of Maria Barbella. And so they would have this play reenacting the murder and everything, but all of the money was donated to Maria's legal fund. So
wow, that must be getting
a big deal.
A big bank wad.
Yeah, huge.
All these clubs were donating and
all the people. And I really think that, I have to keep putting myself back in the frame of mind of 1895, where a woman's virtue is huge at this point. And I think people truly saw that as a big thing for Maria and supported her, like, hey, this guy really took advantage of her. And, it's her livelihood. There were even laws that were made at some point that they could prosecute a man if he promised to marry a woman, had a relationship with her, and then went back on that promise because it was happening so much. And that would truly at this time ruin a woman's life. If she can't get married, that's everything back then. Yeah, so there were actually laws made.
Wow.
So
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I heard that on another podcast.
Yeah, you can kind of see why all these people are backing her.
Exactly. Like, this guy really took advantage of her. So there was also the Cristoforo Colombo Italian newspaper in New York, and they received numerous donations on Maria's behalf and said that they were going to donate all of the money towards her appeal and legal expenses. Now, on July 30th, Maria's attorneys, they actually found a possible witness who could state that Cataldo had a knife when Maria attacked him, which obviously they were going to try to say would prove that it was self-defense. And they were having trouble. You had talked about this earlier. They were actually having trouble finding witnesses to come forward in the bar because, they were scared. Most of them were Italian immigrants. They didn't really understand what was happening and were like, I'm not talking to the police.
Oh, that's right. I didn't even really think of that, them all being Italian in that same bar.
And so during that first trial, they'd actually been looking for witnesses, but were having trouble finding them or getting them to come forward. But they did find this man. The attorneys would not release his name or his location to the newspapers because this guy was already skittish about coming forward and they didn't want people hounding him. So, however, another really odd incident happened on July 30th. Governor Morton received an anonymous letter from someone in Fort Scott, Kansas, and here is what it said. I noticed in the papers that one Maria Barbera, remember her name was reported different.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So I noticed in the papers that one Maria Barbera has been tried and condemned to death by the laws of your state. I, being an unbeliever in capital punishment, wish to make you a proposition. Believing as I do that you are a man of mercy, I propose to offer to you that which, if you are as patriotic and American as I am, you cannot refuse. But grant me the privilege of what I ask. I understand that this Maria Barbera is to die for killing her betrayer. I propose to you, if the laws of your state are so strict that they demand the blood of this helpless woman, that the great state of New York procure passage for me from this city to yours, and that I be permitted to fill this doomed woman's place and let her go free. I think it is a disgrace of our nation for her to be executed. Let me know if your laws will allow me to take her place in case she must be electrocuted. Thank God I have an immortal soul that the laws of New York cannot control, so I fear not what men can do. It is God only that I put trust in. You can announce that there is one such man in the city of Fort Scott. I withhold my name for the present, as I do not wish to be bothered by the curious. So this person is
willing to die for
Maria. I mean, I don't know. I feel a little suspicious about it. I'm like, are you just doing this for notoriety or just to feel involved in the case? Or do you truly believe this? It's just kind of crazy, right?
Right.
Now, this is really interesting, and it kind of goes back to the whole talking about Maria's head. So on August 4th, an article came out in the New York Herald comparing Maria's head to Susan B. Anthony's head. That's right. I said head. They're comparing their heads.
What is with that?
I don't know. And I actually want to say that we talked about this in the Charles Siringo case. It was like phenerology or something. And it was a big thing back then where they would measure people's heads and their skulls to like judge how much of a criminal they were. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was in the Charles Siringo case.
Wow.
So just brief overview on Susan B. Anthony. She was also a leading activist in the women's suffrage movement in the US, and she worked closely with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So the paper, they actually, and I'll post this on our social media, they actually have pictures of both of their heads in the paper. And I'm not going to go through the whole article, but here are just some quotes from that article. So one says, both have strongly marked heads, but Maria's indicates degeneration and Miss Anthony's a high stage of advancement.
Oh, boy.
And here's another one. The nose, the massive lips, and the coarseness of the chiseling of the whole face led one to suppose that her life and her culture had been largely neglected or wrongly guided and trained. In the article, it just goes on and on comparing their two heads. Like I said, we'll post pictures on social media, but it was...
That is so bizarre.
It's so weird. I would just like to know what the reasoning was behind that. Because, you know, they had some science in quotes behind that to say like, this is a good head and this is a bad head, and that because it's a bad head, this is a bad person. It's just, or a lesser person, I guess you could say, not really bad. But anyways, like I said, we'll post pictures. They're pretty entertaining. So during Christmas time, Maria, it was said that she participated in singing and feasting, and she also apparently received numerous gifts, not only from her friends and family, but from the public as well. Maria's appeal, though, it kept getting delayed, but finally, an official date was set for April 7th. Now, the Countess, she had been working behind the scenes this whole time to help Maria, and she actually held a secret meeting with the governor of New York and his aides at his hunting lodge, where they obviously discussed Maria's case. So I'm not 100% sure what was discussed. It wasn't, disclosed. But on March 30th, the Countess replaced all of Maria's attorneys with more professional experienced attorneys, and they were Frederick House and Edward Himes. And on April 7th, House and Himes went to the Court of Appeals to argue Maria's case. So I think the meeting at the lodge probably went pretty well.
Yeah, it sounds like
Sounds like it went good.
Got all new attorneys.
All new attorneys. And so not only did the Countess get new attorneys, but she kind of put together like a whole team to prepare for Maria's appeal. She had medical doctors and psychologists to help support this case.
This lady had clout.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, she did. I think she had not only being a countess, but I think she had some pretty big friends. Mm-hmm. During the appeal, the new attorneys argued that Judge Goff, during the first trial, excluded evidence and that there was not enough evidence to charge her with murder, first-degree murder. And because of this, that there should be a new trial. So the appeal, it would go on for a few days. And on the second day, House actually told the public that he was sure Maria would not die in the electric chair. And with this statement, Maria's father was said to collapse with relief.
That's a big statement.
Huge statement. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which it's kind of risky probably to make that statement because you don't truly know.
That's exactly what I thought.
But on April 21st, 1896, Maria was finally granted a new trial. And the appeal judge wrote that she should not have been charged with first-degree murder since he didn't believe that it was premeditated. And this was actually kind of weird because it's almost a year after the murder. So this is April 21st of 1896, and Maria killed Domenico on April 26, 1895.
Yeah.
So almost a whole year has passed. The appeals judge also discussed the conduct of Judge Goff at the first trial and how he felt it was unethical how he talked to the jurors about Maria and how he would not allow certain testimony into the first trial. So
well, we kind of agreed with that too. So.
Yeah, it's like you can't tell the jurors that they can't have biases, but then you can't have a biasy. So Maria, she was actually told by the warden and the warden's daughter, Elizabeth, that she got her appeal and was able to have another trial. And Maria was so happy and asked for God to bless everyone involved. And they even, I guess the warden's daughter said, even the Judge Goff, and Maria was like, yes, God bless him too. I thought that was kind of cute. Now, they told Maria that she would have to leave Sing Sing and go back to the Tombs, which is like the county jail during the trial. And Maria was upset about this. She wanted to stay in Sing Sing, which I don't blame her.
Yeah.
Kind of proves how well she was treated there. So
Exactly.
But she did eventually move back to the Tombs on April 29th. And Maria took with her, she would always read these little children's books. And she took those with her to the Tombs and her yellow canary. So the Journal newspaper in New York reported that Maria has completely transformed. She was described as brighter looking and her eyes were no longer dull. The reporter said that her animalistic side was gone and that she was able to hold an intelligent conversation, and she now had reading and writing skills. And Maria, she actually used these new writing skills to write a letter of gratitude to her supporters. She sent the letter to the World newspaper, and it basically just thanked her attorneys, her supporters, and I think she just wanted to show her appreciation for everything that was that had happened.
Right, and she can read and write.
And she can read and write now, exactly. So I think we'll go ahead and stop there, and we'll pick up on part 2 with the beginning of her second trial, which starts in November of 1896. But I think this is a good stopping point. Like, it's a lot of information. So
Right. Yeah, because there's going to be another trial.
Another trial, yeah. So we'll get into her second trial, and she's got some other stuff that happens to her in life. So we'll get into all of that. And I think we can do it in just one more episode, but maybe there'll be 3. I'm hoping just 2. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited.
Me too. Now I got to finish going through all the research. So, yeah. But subscribe, rate, and follow to our podcast. We're on every social media. So if you're looking for pictures of any of our cases or episodes that we do, take a look at that. And we hope you enjoyed listening to the first part of Maria Barbella. And we hope you come back to listen to more stories about Italian Americans. See you next time.
See you next time.